Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Soumya. In today's video, I will be doing this lab on build a website on Google Cloud. So this is a challenge lab. This challenge lab have 7 tasks which we have to complete. All these tasks needs to be completed so that you can get a completion badge. So this is a challenge scenario. So as part of this task, we will be creating a Kubernetes cluster, then we'll be deploying the application, we'll be creating a new microservices, then deploy this new microservices, then we'll be configuring and deploying the front-end microservice, then we will create a containerized version of this microservice, then finally we will deploy this microservice. So let's start this lab. You can click on Start Lab and you need to log in with your student ID and password which you get with this lab. Click on Open Google Cloud Console. Then you need to sign in with the username and the password. Accept this. Once you log into the Cloud Console, you need to accept the terms of service. Click on Agree and Continue. Let me explain this challenge scenario in a simple terms. You have joined this fancy store organization and you have been given the responsibility to make improvements to this fancy store's e-commerce website. So the website is currently built as a single large piece of software, which is monolith. Since it's monolith, it makes it hard to manage and update. So your task is to break down this large code base into smaller, more manageable parts called microservices. So to perform this task, first you need to get this source code, and this fancy store has stored the source code in the GitHub repository. So you need to clone this source code from the GitHub repository. Once you clone this repository, you then need to create separate containers for each part of the code. And this will make it easier to manage and deploy. So the containers will be like small packages that will hold specific parts of the website. So once we have built and tested this initial version of the website, we will later proceed to divide it into a smaller parts. So these smaller parts will be microservices. So each of these microservices will be responsible for a specific function or feature of the website. By breaking it down into smaller pieces, it will be easier to work on different parts of the website simultaneously and we can deploy updates more efficiently. And we have some certain rules which we have to follow. First, we have to create a cluster in the US Central 1 region only, and we have to follow a naming convention for resources like instances. And we should also use a cost effective resource sizes, and we have to make use of N1-standard-1 machine type. So by completing this task, we will be improving the website scalability, maintainability, and overall performance, ensuring a smoother and more successful user experience for the customers. So let's go to task 1. Here we need to download the monolith code and build the container. So first we need to log into the new project and open up Cloud Shell. So we have already in the Google Cloud Console. First we need to download the monolith code and then we need to run this script. So first let's clone this repository. So if you click on this, you will get the URL here. So it will take you to the GitHub repository where this monolith code is stored. So this is the place. So here you have to click on this button, copy this URL. So you need to clone this repository. Go back to Google Cloud Console, activate the Cloud Shell. Can open this in new window as well. Activate your Cloud Shell. Now we are inside this Cloud Shell. So let me take you to the notepad. So first let's set some environment variables. We'll be making use of these variables in upcoming task. So let's export these variables. So if we go back to our task here, so here as you can see they have provided a value for this. So this is monolith identifier is the variable name. So let's copy this value and go to our notepad and update it here. Then we need to get the cluster name here. So cluster name they have mentioned. So we have to create a cluster by this name. So let's copy this and go back to notepad and update here. Then next let's get the value for this. Let's copy this as well. Go back to notepad, paste here. Next let's copy this as well, products identifier. Then front end identifier, copy this. We have the variables and the variable values. So copy this. So whatever you get in your lab, you have to ensure that you provide those values only. So copy this and go back to your Cloud Shell. Paste the environment variables here and execute it. So now the environment variables are set. Now let's go back to our notepad. So the first task is you need to download the monolith code and build your container. So this is the URL. I have already pasted it. So that URL you can get it. In your lab only you will be given this link. If you click on this link, it will take you to the GitHub page. So if you click on this code drop down button, here you will get the clone URL. So you can copy that. Have already copied my notepad here. So I will just copy this and execute it here. When we issue this git clone command, it will clone this repository to this working directory. So if I execute pwg, this is my working directory, working directory. So if I do ls, that code should be available. So as you can see here, monolith to microservices. So code got downloaded to this path. So now we have downloaded this repository. So there is a setup.sh script in the root directory of the project, so that we need to run. So I'll be executing these two steps here. Cd to this, and if we do ls, here we can find setup.sh script. So this we need to execute. To execute a shell script, we have to run like this: dot slash forward slash followed by the script name. So this script is installing the npm, then it's installing the node.js. So it is downloading all the required packages for building the monolith application and microservices. Now the setup is completed successfully. So let's go back to our page. Once that is done, we need to ensure that the Cloud Shell is running the latest Node.js version. So to do that, we need to execute this command. So let's copy this command, go back to Cloud Shell. Let's clear the screen. Let's execute it here. As you can see, it's using the latest version. Now let's go back. Then we need to push the monolith build, which is located in the monolith directory. There should be a Docker file in this folder path. Then we have to run the cloud build to build it. Then we have to push it to the GCR. And this is a naming convention we need to follow. So the artifact repository name should be this way. So we have to follow this specific syntax. And the image name, we have to name it fancy-monolith. Image version, we have to give it as 1.0.0. So let's do this as well. So here let's cd to this and start the npm. So let's copy this both and go back to our Cloud Shell. Let's cd to that. Or let's do ls. There should be a Docker file. So here you can see a Docker file. So we are inside that monolith folder. Next, we will have to run the cloud build to build it. Then we have to push it to the Google Cloud Registry. Before doing that, we have to enable few of the APIs. So let's enable that. Copy this command. Execute it here. Gcloud services enable cloud build. So this will enable. Okay. Before that, we need to set the project. The project ID will get here. You can copy this. Execute it here. So we are setting the project ID here. So that's very much required. You have to do this at the start of the lab only, so that you don't face any issues. Now let's enable this API. So let's copy this API and execute here. This is the API name. So when we execute gcloud services enable, this will enable this specific API. Once that is done, we have to run cloud build to build our Docker file. Then we have to push it to the JCR. So let's go to our notepad. So here I'll be executing gcloud build submit hyphen tag. So we are tagging it this way as they have mentioned. So this should be the repository name. So I have copied this and paste it here. So this will fetch the project name. So this we have copied and pasted over there. Then the image name should be this fancy monolith, and this name is nothing but a monolith identifier. So we have already set this environment variable with this value. After this, we have mentioned it as $monolith identifier. So it will take that value followed by this version number. So the image version should be 1.0.0. So this way you have to execute the command. So copy this command and execute it here. And dot is very much required because it will pick the current directory and start building it. Since we are inside this monolith and this contains a Docker file, it will pick the Docker file in this specific path and it will start with the build. By running this command, we are triggering Google Cloud Build to build a container image from the application code which is in the current directory, and the resulting container image will be tagged with the specified tag. So we have specified the tag as gcr.io followed by the project ID and the name with a tag, and then we will be pushing this to the Google Container Registry where it can be used to deploy and run the application in JKE. AK is nothing but Google Kubernetes engine. Here gcloud build submit. This command will initiate the build submission process to Google Cloud Build. And hyphen tag is very important here because we are tagging the container image. Now you can see the status is success. So this build was successful. So if we scroll up, you can see what it has done. You can check the logs at this specific location. Whatever we have defined in the Docker file, it's executing all the steps one by one. This step is successful now. The task one is complete. Let's go back to this. And if you click on check my progress, this should be complete. We have downloaded the monolith code and we have built the container. So Docker file was already available. We have just downloaded the code and enabled the Cloud Build API, and then we built the container using the Docker file. So this task is complete. Let's move ahead with the task 2. We have to create a Kubernetes cluster and deploy the application. So here they have asked us to create all the resources in the US Central 1-A zone. So in US Central 1A zone only we need to create all the resources. And this cluster will have 3 nodes. And we have to name our cluster with this name fancy-cluster, and the region should be this and the node count should be 3. So let's go back to our notepad. So first let's set our zone. Copy this command. Go back to Cloud Shell. Here execute that command. So this will set the zone. Now the zone is set. Next, we need to enable this container API. So copy this and execute it here. Next, we need to create a cluster. So let's copy this command. Go to Cloud Shell, execute it here. So what this command does is, here gcloud container clusters create. So we are issuing a create command and followed by the cluster underscore name. So this is a variable. It will pick the value from the environment variable, whatever we have set. So with that name, it will create a cluster with the number of nodes we have mentioned it as 3. So it will create a cluster with 3 nodes. So let's execute this command. Here you can see a message creating cluster fancy-cluster 516 in US Central -A. So we have just passed the variable name here and it has picked the value from the environment variable and it is creating the cluster with that name. So we also need the cluster with the same name. So the cluster name is this. It will take some time for the cluster to get created. Let's wait for some more time. Cluster is created now with the name fancy-cluster 516 in the US Central region. So you can go and verify here as well. If you go to dashboard, here under Kubernetes engine, you can click on clusters. You can see cluster is created with the 3 nodes. So let's go back to our task. And next we need to create and expose the deployment. So we have to create the deployment and expose this. So let's go back to our notepad here. So let's copy this first command. Go to our Cloud Shell. Here paste that command. So here kubectl create deployment. This will create a deployment with this name. I am passing this monolith identifier name. So the name of the deployment will be this monolith identifier. This is a variable we have already set. So we'll be creating a deployment with this name and the version should be 1.0.0. So this is the version we have to give. Container version should be this. So we will be doing only this part. First we will create the deployment. So let's go back to our Cloud Shell. Let's execute this command. The deployment is created. Next we need to expose this. So to do that, let's copy this command here. So what it is doing is it is exposing this deployment and the deployment name we are giving hyphen type we are giving the load balancer and the port number whatever they have specified here. Port number externally accessible port is 80 and the application port is 8080. So this is the target port is 8080. This is application port and this is the externally accessible port. Whenever we are exposing deployment, we have to make use of this load balancer. Since we are exposing this deployment, so we have to execute this way. Let's execute this command. Now the service got created and this deployment is exposed. Let's execute kubectl get services. So this is the one which we just created fancy monolith -873. So this is the external IP. So let's copy this external IP and open here. Now you can see this welcome to the fancy store. So this is what required. So make sure that your deployment is named fancy monolith -873 and that you have exposed the service on port 80 and mapped it to port 8080. So it's the same. If we go back to our Cloud Shell, here we can see this the name is correct and the port is also correct. Click on check my progress and this should be complete now. Once that is done, let's move ahead with the task query. Create new microservices. So we have to containerize this. There are two services, orders microservice and products microservice. So we have to create a containerized version of this microservice. So we have to navigate to the source routes mentioned below and upload the artifacts that are created in the Google Container Registry with whatever metadata they have specified here. So let's go back to our notepad here. Let's cd to that. Copy this first command. Go back to Cloud Shell. Execute it here. So we are going inside that orders. So this is one service. We are going inside that orders directory. This is a root folder. So this is a one. And then GCR repo name they have given, image name they have given, and the image version they have given. Copy this. So here you have to execute this way. You have to give gcloud builds submit hyphen tag and the name. So whatever name they have mentioned here, GCR repo name. So this name I have given with the image name fancy hyphen orders hyphen 903. I'm passing it as a variable. The variable name is orders identifier. You can see orders underscore identifier is the variable name. I'm the followed by colon 1.0.0. This is a version followed by the dot which is represents the current working directory. Now the operation is complete. Now it shows us, status as success. This is complete. Next we need to do the same for products microservice as well. So here we are just uploading the artifacts. So let's go back to our notepad here. Let's copy this first one cd. We will cd to the products folder. Let me clear the screen. So let's cd to that. Once we are inside the products, so this is another microservice. Here we need to execute that command. Copy this command and paste it here. So here again we are uploading the artifact. So here gcloud build submit. It will upload the artifact with this specific tag and the products identifier. This is a name which we are giving here. So image name should be fancy products 214. So that one I have set it in the products identifier variable, and then I'm tagging with the version 1.0.0. So let's execute this command. And this is complete now. Let's move ahead. Let's go back to our build website. You can click on check my progress, and this should be complete now. Don't get confused here. Once this microservices serving contains and the images uploaded to the GCA, you should deploy and expose these services. So that will be in the next task, which is a task for deploy the new microservices. So in this task, we are just containerizing and uploading these images to the GCA. So this is complete. That's why the assessment is complete. We have just containerized the version of orders and product microservices, and we have uploaded it to GCR. Next, let's move ahead with the task for deploy the new microservices. In this task, we have to deploy these microservices. We have to deploy these new containers following the same process that you followed for the fancy monolith 873 monolith. So whatever method we have followed over there, we have to follow the same method. So here we have to create and expose deployments for two of the microservices. Here for orders microservice, they have given the cluster name, container version, application port, and the externally accessible port. So this way we have to create and expose the deployment. So let's go back to our notepad here. This is done. Task 3 is complete now. Let's move it with the task 4. We have to deploy the new microservice. So first we will create a deployment, then we will expose this deployment. So let's copy this command. Let's go back to our Cloud Shell. So here, paste that. So here what we are doing is we are creating a deployment with this name. So orders underscore identifier. So the container name should be this, and the cluster name it will be using this only fancy cluster 516. Let's create this deployment. Let's go back to our Cloud Shell. So by executing this command, we are telling Kubernetes to create a deployment by the name, whatever we have specified, and our orders underscore identifier variable. And so by this name, let's execute this command. So now the deployment is created. Next, we need to expose this. So to do that, let's copy this and execute it here. You can see a service got created. And if we run kubectl get services, you can find the list of services. See, now we have created a fancy orders 903, and it is exposed. External IP is still pending, it's creating. So with this port number, if we go back here, so they have mentioned here application port should be 8081 and the externally accessible port should be 80. So as you can see here, the port 80, this represents the externally accessible IP, and this target port, this is the application port 8081. and the type should be load balancer. So if we execute this get services again, the external IP got created here. So this is our one. Now this is done. Let's do it for products microservice as well. So here also we have to make use of this container name should be this. This name actually we are passing it as a variable here, products identifier. So we'll be making use of this variable. Okay, let's go back to our notepad. Here, let's copy this command, kubectl create deployment. Go back to our cloud shell. Here, let's execute that command. So here we are creating a deployment with this name, products underscore identifier. Whatever value we have specified in this variable will be picked up, and hyphen hyphen image. So it will make use of this container name. It will tag it with the version 1.0.0. Let's execute this command. So now the deployment got created. Let's expose this. So let's go back to our notepad. Let's copy this. So here, as you can see, this will expose this deployment, whatever we have created here. And the type will be load balancer. Externally accessible port will be 80, and the target port they have specified it as 8082. So here you can see application port should be 8082. So you have to ensure that you do it correctly. So copy this, go back to cloud shell and execute it here. Now the service will be created, and if we execute this kubectl get services, you can find there are 3 services now. So this is the one which we have created at the start of the lab, and these orders and products are the 2 microservices which we just created. We have created deployment and we have created a services for that deployment. So we can verify these deployments once we get this external IP address created for both of the service. We can verify it. So let's go back to our cloud shell. So here you can see external IP address got created for both of this. So to verify this, let's copy this, open in a new tab, provide this API followed by the orders. So you have to give this way. This way you can verify it. Let's do it for products as well. So you have to copy this external IP, go here, go open in a new tab, followed by API, followed by products. When you hit on this URL, you will get this. This way you can verify it. So you can click on check my progress and this should be complete now. Now this is complete. Let's move ahead with the task by configuring and deploying the front-end microservice. So now that we have extracted both the orders and products microservice, so we have to configure front-end service to point to them and get it deployed. So let's do that. We have to use the nano editor to replace the local URL with the IP address of the new products microservice. So let me run one by one. Let's copy first one, cd. Now we have changed to this specific directory here. If we do ls, we list the folders and the files which are present inside here. Then we have to do nano.env. So here we have localhost. We have to update it with the IP address. Let's get the IP address. So for products, this is the external IP. Let's copy this to our notepad. Place this here. And for products, this is the external IP. Copy this to your notepad and replace this product's IP address with the actual IP address. So once this is done, copy this, go back to your cloud shell. So instead of nano, you can also make use of vi, do vi.env. Let's delete this completely. Copy this. In .env, you have to update here. So I have updated with actual IP address. Now let's save this. So if we do cat.env, here you can find. So this URL is containing the actual IP address. So now this is done. So if we go back here, so we have replaced this localhost URL with the actual IP address. Now let's run this npm run build. So once that is done, execute npm run build. Now this is complete. Let's go back to this. So task 5 is complete now. Let's move it with the task 6, create a containerized version of the front-end microservice. Now we have containerized and deployed the microservices, orders and products, and we have configured the front-end service to point to those microservices. And in the final step, we have to containerize and deploy the front-end. So we have to make use of Cloud Build to package the contents of the front-end service and push them to the Google Container Registry. So here they have given the service root folder path and the GCR repo which we have to use, and the image name and the image version. So let's go back to our notepad here. Let's copy this first command. If we go back to here, so this is the source root folder path. So cd to that folder path. Now we are inside that front end. Next, once that is done, we have to make use of Cloud Build. So let's copy this command and execute it here. Front end identifier, this variable I am passing here. Image name should be fancy hyphen front end hyphen 465. So I'm passing this value under this variable front end identifier. The version I'm giving it as 1.0.0. We have to submit a build by this name fancy hyphen front end with the version 1.0.0. So this is how you do it. So we have to execute this command. So now this is successful. If we scroll up, so here you can see we have submitted this build with this specific tag. We are making use of that front end, making use of that name. So now this is complete. So you can come back and check your progress. This should be complete. We have created a containerized version of the front end microservice. This is complete. Now let's move ahead with the task 7, deploy the front end microservice. Now we need to deploy the front end microservice. We have to create and expose the deployment. Cluster name will be the same and the container name should be this one. And the container version should be this, and application port 8080, external accessible port should be 80. So let's go back to our notepad. Here we'll be creating the deployment for the front-end microservice. Here we'll execute kubectl create deployment followed by the deployment name and the image. So it will use the image. So if we go back here, so the container name, so this image it will be using fancy hyphen frontend hyphen 465 and with this version 1.0.0. So let's copy this command, go back to our cloud shell, let's execute it here. So we have created a deployment for front end service. Now let's expose that. So we need to expose this deployment. So here we are exposing this deployment and the type we are giving it as a load balancer hyphen port 80. So this is an externally accessible port. Then application port 8080 we are specifying here. So the target port, under target port you have to specify that. So copy this and here execute this. Now this is export. So if we run kubectl get services, it will show all the services which we have created. So the first service which we created is fancy monolith. For this monolith we have created this. Next these two are microservices. So we have created 4 services here. Orders and products we have created one service, and this is a front end service. External IP is still pending. Now the external IP got generated for this front end service. We can verify the deployment by copying this external IP address and opening in a new browser. So this should take you to the fancy store. Now it has taken us to the fancy store. So this is how we have to verify it. So with the external IP address, we can verify if the deployment was successful or not. So you can click on check my progress and this should be complete now. So once you complete all the tasks in this challenge lab, you will be getting this badge. If you click on this, you can check the points. You have to complete all the tasks to get 100 score in this. If you don't complete any of this task, you will not be able to get the badge for this. Once you get 100 out of 100, so once you complete the challenge lab, you will get the badge. So that's it for today's video. In this video, I have explained how you can build a website on Google Cloud, and I have explained each and every task, how you can complete this task, how you can execute each of these commands and what it does. I hope this video was helpful. If you found my video helpful, please like and subscribe to my channel and stay up to date with the latest content on this channel. Thank you all for watching. See you in the next video.